What's up, guys? I'm BTC. There was some pretty massive changes on the PTR, and they are without a doubt going to have a significant impact on the game. Double barrier and bunker comp, as we know it, is done, and you can expect the game and the matches to get a lot faster than we've seen in quite a long time. Now, this doesn't mean that it will completely disappear, as I'm certain there are places and situations where these sorts of comps can still be strong, but make no mistake, all of these changes to barriers have dramatically altered what is now possible in the game. I'm not going to run through every single change, as I already did that in my video yesterday. If you want to see a full breakdown of all those changes, go and check out that video. What I'm going to do today is explain what all of these changes mean and how it's going to impact the game, because right away, I know that a lot of people thought that this is going to be really good in some ways, like for example for Bastion, but in truth, that's just not the case. There's other factors that you really need to take into consideration. But before I get started, if you enjoy the content I create, you guys should really know that YouTube has changed how their system works, and it now greatly favors big companies and celebrities. And that's why it's more important than ever that you hit the like button, you share the video to help it get traction. Otherwise, the video just gets buried by the algorithm. So I would greatly appreciate it, and other independent YouTubers would appreciate it as well. This is the third major balance change that we've gotten since the role queue system was implemented. Now, the first two really didn't do a whole lot because bunker and double barrier was still very strong even after those changes, but this one definitely gonna make a difference. And while I'm talking about all this stuff, you're gonna see some footage in the background of characters attacking the new barriers, and you can see just how incredibly fast they're able to destroy them, especially Orissa's new barrier. Characters like Roadhog and Reaper can just shred through it incredibly fast. McCree can fan, roll, fan, and then just take it out. Soldier can destroy the barrier with one full ammo load and his Helix. Sigma's barrier isn't much better either, and as you can also see, it gets destroyed fairly quick. But Sigma has some other issues that I'm going to talk about in a little bit here, but in truth, the only character that still has a reliable, strong barrier is Reinhardt, and even then, it's still much weaker than it was before. Now, as soon as these changes were announced, I saw a lot of people starting to say that this was going to be huge and a kind of an indirect buff for Bastion. It was going to make him so much better. Yeah, I'm not so sure on that one. You see, while it's true that Bastion can shred through the enemy barriers very quickly, as I just showed you, so can all the other DPS. Why would you need Bastion if Roadhog can destroy the Orisa barrier in only 4 hits? And that's just by himself. Imagine when you have the rest of your team attacking the barrier. It's just gonna get destroyed very, very quickly. And same thing with Sigma. Reinhardt, a little bit longer, but still, you're going to be able to shred these barriers. It's not like you need to have a dedicated barrier buster character anymore. It's just not the case. And Bastion is one of the most situational and niche characters in the entire game. He also requires quite a bit of team support in the form of healing and his own barrier protection. You need to keep him safe because he can't move. He's just stationary. So even though the enemy barriers aren't very good, they're terrible now, so are yours, which means that Bastion is now significantly more vulnerable because he doesn't have the barriers that he needs to protect him. Now, I do expect that Bastion will present a bit of a problem in the lower bracket for players, but in the upper bracket, it seems to me that those players would be far, far better off using a different DPS hero. Why use Bastion when you could just use a Hanzo, a McCree, a Soldier, or even a Tracer? Those other characters bring so much more utility and versatility than Bastion, who needs to be babysit by the rest of his team. Why use a character that's really only good for destroying barriers when all the other DPS are now just as good? With the recent buff to Tracer's damage and the substantial nerf to the barriers, a high-skill Tracer is just going to be able to run around and absolutely destroy any Bastion on the enemy team. And don't forget, Sombra is still a thing as well, and without the barriers there, well, she can now be a lot more effective. And another thing to keep in mind is with the substantially lower uptime on the barriers, you have characters like Widow and Hanzo, who could potentially get way better. In fact, that was the very reasoning that Blizzard used when nerfing Widow's grappling hook just with this patch. So if the game ends up moving more towards dive, then Widow and Hanzo may not be the best, but otherwise, their ability to just one-shot any character, or most characters, from very far away just got a whole lot better without all those barriers in the way. And this kind of leads into the next thing, which sitting in one place in the general kind of bunker strategy just isn't very good anymore. Bastion, again, stationary character, yeah, you can relocate, but in order for him to do the most damage and be most effective, he needs to sit in one place. And the changes we just got made sitting in one place very, very bad. And this is why you can just use other DPS, right? You can use a soldier who can very quickly relocate, or a Hanzo, or a Tracer, or whoever else. You can just very quickly move around, and I think that's kind of where we're going. I'll talk about more of that in a second here. And now I think it's very possible that Dive could return as the overall dominant comp, because Winston, D.Va, Tracer, Lucio, and even Genji all got buffs recently. And while I still think that Genji needs a little bit more than what he's got, the fact remains that the other characters are going to be very strong. And there is a small chance that Pharah Mercy might also make a return as well. And I think the significant nerf to the barriers will likely mean that there's more hit scan, however, like Soldier and McCree and Ashe. And if that happens, then, you know, Pharah isn't really all that great. So it really depends, right? Like, what are they using? Is it more like Tracer and Genji sort of stuff? And in which case, you could definitely run a pharmacy on the enemy team. But if they're running, you know, McCree or Ashe or something, or even Widow, right? Like, you're not really going to be able to run that Pharah up in the sky. So that's kind of a whole nother issue. Going back to the barriers real fast, I want to show you a comparison of Reinhardt's barrier recharge to Sigma's barrier recharge. And you can see right here, Reinhardt's recharge is substantially better than Sigma's. It's not even close. In fact, when testing Sigma's new barrier health and the recharge, I found it quite difficult to have any good amount of uptime on the barrier. You can pull the barrier back, recall it, in order to quickly stop it from taking damage. But remember, there's a fairly long delay before the recharging starts to take effect. And ultimately, this means that Sigma's barrier uptime is going to be very low, right? You might end up leaving the barrier, just kind of letting it stay there till it's destroyed, and then trying to wait until it's fully recharged. But I don't know, like, you could have it up for a couple seconds and then try to take it down, but really, with the lower health and the very bad recharge, you're not going to be able to rely on it nearly as much as before. Blizzard has been moving Sigma more towards being an off-tank position with all of his recent changes, and it seems with this most recent one, he's probably going to be stuck there. I mean, you could try to run him in a main position with a Zarya backing him up or something, but it seems like Sigma's kind of stuck in that off-tank position now. Now, on another note, I want to show you something about Reinhardt and just how unbelievably good his passive now is. And you can see on the screen, this is how far Roadhog gets moved by Lucio, and all the other characters would get moved the same distance. And then this is how far Reinhardt gets moved. I mean, it's almost worthless to try to boop an enemy Reinhardt now. You're just not going to move him that much. I mean, yeah, if he's right next to an edge, then you could still knock him off. But for the most part, he's not going anywhere. And it's probably not even worth it to try to boop the character. Now, there are some other pretty interesting things about these changes, however, in that there will likely be new tank combinations that we just really haven't seen before. I think a good example of this is Orisa and Zarya. Previously, this was a pretty bad combo because of the way Orisa's barrier works, and it meant that it was not remotely as effective for Zarya trying to use her bubble on Orisa as it would be using it on a Reinhardt, for example. However, because Orisa's barrier is now substantially weaker, it's going to get broken way faster, and she's going to need additional backup and protection. And this means that you could use Orisa's barrier until it's destroyed, follow up with a Fortify just to keep the Orisa safe while you're taking all that damage, and then you can have Zarya's bubble and use it to eat up whatever remaining time is left on the Orisa barrier cooldown. So suddenly, Orisa and Zarya don't seem like such a terrible combination. Now, I'm not saying that this will suddenly become the meta or anything, but it's interesting to think about because these two characters, as I said, you really wouldn't use them all that much before. And now, well, there's a pretty good chance that it could be effective. On the healer side of things, who starts to shine is going to largely be dependent on what type of meta comes into play. Now, if it's dive, then someone like Ana will probably continue to struggle, but if it's more standard like Reinhardt and Zarya in that type of situation, then she obviously would be much better in that. Now, I have a feeling that Moira will still be used quite a bit in the lower bracket, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a significant drop-off in her pick rates in the upper bracket. As far as the other characters, again, it's going to kind of depend on what's going on. If it is sort of like a Reinhardt-Zarya thing, or maybe even the Orisa-Zarya thing, then there might be some more use of the Brigitte pick, but again, I think there's still a lot of issues with Brigitte in her current state. It's important to remember that there are so many changes going on right now that are drastically affecting how the characters are going to work, that it's pretty difficult to predict who's going to come out on top. The easy go-to is, of course, dive, but other things less expected, like that Orisa-Zarya matchup, might actually end up being very good. You know, it's hard to say right now because there's so much stuff that's kind of moving around. I can tell you that double barrier comp and the bunker, just as we know it, is done. Right? Like, it's just not gonna work when you have characters like Roadhog and Soldier that can very easily destroy Orisa's barrier. There is just simply no way that a comp that just bunkers down and stays in one spot is going to work nearly as effective as it did before. Even if you were to switch it to a Reinhardt and Sigma or Reinhardt and Orisa, just so that you get the extra effect from his barrier, I just don't think that stationary bunker style is really going to work that much anymore. I mean, it's entirely possible that we could see something like Reinhardt combined with one of those other Orisa Sigma and try to maintain bunker comp, but it would probably function in a different way than what we have. If you do have that double barrier, it could be something like Reinhardt and Sigma for the main protective elements, you know, the primary barrier of Reinhardt just to keep the team alive, and then throw in a Lucio so that he can quickly move everyone around. Remember, Reinhardt got that substantial buff to his movement speed when the barrier is up, so now he can keep his barrier up with a Lucio boosting him. You can run right into the enemy team very quickly, and you can throw in an Ana or a Baptiste for the extra large healing, and for the DPS, you know, you might end up using a Tracer or a Hanzo, possibly a McCree. You could end up with a very mobile team comp that still uses double barrier, but it's going to function, again, in a much different way than the stationary Orisa version we have now. Another possibility could just be the very standard dive comp that we've seen in the past, with Winston and D.Va, or maybe even a Hammond, depending on the map. The DPS would absolutely include Tracer and then someone else, and then the healer would probably be Lucio and someone else. Again, those other two would just be depending on what map, what situation, that sort of stuff. Those could happen. Or we could have other variations that we really haven't been using before. Again, it's possible that double barrier may still exist, but I just don't think it's going to be nearly as prominent as it is right now. Because, as I said, I just don't see the whole sitting in one place and trying to hold that area as going to work nearly as well as it did before. And for that reason, I don't think Bastion is going to be nearly as good as some people think he is. He might get some use on defense, but I think the possibility of him simply being overrun is very high, right? If you could just have let's say a Reinhardt and a D.Va, or a Reinhardt and a Sigma, and you get Lucio boosted, then you have the barrier from both of those characters, plus you have the kinetic grasp. You can just charge right into that Bastion, and your team can just overrun the whole area. I mean, it kind of feels a little bit similar to what happened with Goats, where you just kind of rush in and destroy everything in that area. So I don't see the whole sitting in one spot thing really working. No matter what it turns out to be, though, I think there is a ton of new opportunity for a lot more variety in team comps. And overall, I can say that the game is definitely going to speed up. You're not going to have these huge, long, drawn-out battles that we had in Goats or Double Barrier, where you just have constant attacks and like things are just, you know, everything's being blocked by the barriers and all that sort of stuff, and you just have these fights that last seemingly forever. I don't really see that happening. I think the fights are going to be much faster, much higher impact, and overall the game is just going to be faster. So what do you guys think about all of these changes? Let me know down below. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to see more, subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss anything. Also, come hang out in my Discord server and my Twitch live stream. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters. If you'd like to see what kind of cool VIP rewards you can get, check the links down below. And remember, always blame the controller, because it's never your fault.